Cheers to our guests who are joining.
Cheers.
Cheers.
We'll get started here, folks, in about a minute and a half.
Perfect.
Did you see that? Wasn't like cool.
LaPrecious, all systems go? I see her little cursor. Outstanding.
Yes, we're good, and we're live on Facebook now.
Good. Hey, welcome, Facebook viewers. We are good and we're ready to go. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first bourbon program of 2021. I am Andy Trinan, the president and CEO at the Fraser History Museum, the official starting point of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. We are supposed to be coming to you live tonight from the Spirit of Kentucky Bourbon Exhibition, but as many of you know, we had weather today, so that is not a possibility. So guess what? We're coming to you live from my dining room. And that's going to be good enough. The only potential problem there, folks, is that makes me tech support here. So if something goes wrong, that is not my biggest strength. Hopefully we can get through this without a problem. We do have LaPrecious Brewer working from another computer in her home, and I think we're good to go. So let's get started. We're taking you down the rabbit hole of love today. So please join me in welcoming our guest today, the founder and the face of Rabbit Hole, Kaveh Zamanian, and the inspiration and perhaps the better face of Rabbit Hole, and that is Heather Zamanian. Welcome, both of you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you,
Thank
Andrew.
you.
Appreciate it.
No offense by that, Kaveh, but you know, if you met another woman, you know, maybe a Russian, we'd be sitting in Russia right now drinking vodka. So
No offense taken, my friend. I know she's the better half for sure.
tell me about how you guys met, and we'll weave this story throughout the next hour and a half. But you know, kind of your first impressions of how you met and how you fell in love.
Well, you know, we actually are both by training psychologists, and we at the time lived in Chicago, and we happened to actually meet through a mutual friend, and that was kind of the beginning of our romance, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
I was not a big I was not a big bourbon guy. I think, you know, we struck a conversation, and we were talking about spirits at a bar, and I was drinking scotch, she was drinking bourbon, and that was really kind of the beginning of the love affair with Heather, and then ultimately with bourbon.
Heather, a turnabout is fair play, and you can have as much fun with this as you like, because Kaveh shared with me earlier, you're like my wife, sometimes you like to take your zingers, but what was your first impression of Kaveh?
My first impression.
You can be frank, just be honest.
I mean, you know, he says it like it is. I don't know, just smart, very thoughtful, and I don't know, fun. A lot more fun than I was.
I thought you told me
at the time.
you thought that I'm a pompous ass at first.
Well, maybe a little bit, but I think I saw through that pretty quickly. I think I realized that was all for show, and that you're a softie underneath it all.
There was something you were attracted to in that, though. There was
Exactly. What does that say about me, right?
Well, first of all, welcome to everybody. We're really excited to have you on the program tonight. We are going to taste 4 outstanding expressions and talk about them, and talk about, you know, this tie to Kentucky, and how the brand even took a deeper dive into Kentucky with kind of rebranding some of these products, and I'm really excited about that. But let's talk about what we're going to taste tonight, and these taste profiles. Cave Hill, Derringer, is that the?
Derringer.
It's just called Derringer. Okay, High Gold and Boxer Grail. Before we get into the brands, you decided to tell a story with each of these in the last couple of years. Tell me about that decision and how it changed from your original presentations.
Sure, sure. One of the things that stood out for me is that consumers are buying bourbon by brand rather than by the type of expression that it actually is. Most Kentuckians, for example, know that Old Forester, let's say it's a high rye bourbon, and Pappy is a wheated bourbon. And outside of that, there's not a whole lot of distinction from a standpoint of what's actually in the bottle. So in order to be able to educate people on what Rabbit Hole actually has in the bottle, we decided to not only have all the mash bills, essentially the recipes of these whiskeys on the bottle, but also give them a secondary name that allows people to distinguish them for what they are. Because right now, we just don't have the nomenclature to separate out the whole range of different bourbons that are offered on the shelf.
So, I mean, that sounds like a fun process, right? How did you come upon these four? There's so many great stories in the state of Kentucky, and you picked four great ones.
Yeah, so it was a combination of things. I think two things we were thinking about. One was provenance and thinking about how do we highlight things that are essentially close to home and showcase particularly about Louisville. I think the other piece was playing on Lewis Carroll's kind of jabberwacky and playing around with different names. That's what actually Derringer is about. So Derringer was a kind of combination of daring and ringer. Those are the words that came to mind thinking about Heather, that she kind of dared me to go down the rabbit hole. And she's essentially kind of the ringer that really was the master behind the scene of orchestrating this. That was the same thing with Boxer Grail. Louisville has a tremendous history of boxing tradition. And we were just talking about, of course, there's Muhammad Ali, but aside from him, there's a whole slew of great boxing tradition in Louisville. And we thought that Boxer Grail would be, an interesting name to highlight that aspect of Louisville. And High Gold is named after Christian Heigold. Christian Heigold was an immigrant in the late 1800s here in Louisville, was a stonemaker. Actually, one of his beautiful buildings is showcased now right off River Road. So that was the inspiration behind High Gold. And last but not least is Cave Hill, where, we have a lot of, I read a book a long time ago called Dead Distillers. And there's essentially couple of cemeteries around the country where have the highest concentration of dead distillers. And this was really a homage to all the predecessors, all the giants of the industry that we were kind of essentially building Rabbit Hole on their shoulders. So Cave Hill is an inspiration and a kind of nod to those folks.
Okay, that's excellent. We're going to start with that tasting. But first I have to ask you, because you're both, as you mentioned, you're both psychologists, trained psychologists, and I'm fascinated with psychology. I love psychology. I love psychology and sociology, and I'm going to resist the temptation to have you try to fix me here today, because we only have an hour and a half, and that's not possible. But I'm curious, in a relationship, if you guys are doing what normal wives and husbands do, and sometimes you're not getting along, do you ever have the temptation for psychological analysis? Do you ever use terms on each other when you're misbehaving?
Oh yeah, you more than me, but yeah.
Do I?
Yes, you do.
Tell me about that.
But yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's like, I think you can just easily throw out the terms. You can identify things, I guess, both of us, when you know something's happening or it's related to something that previous relationships, as far as like, yeah.
Well, let's put it this way. There is no shortage of baggage on both sides.
Yes.
So we have a lot of
Maybe
fun.
that's a better way to put it.
We have a lot of fun trying to, I guess, in some ways account for our history of, how we are, and especially when we get in a pickle.
Yeah.
Does that make it less emotional, more clinical? It's like you just, this is what it is. This is what happens in every relationship. And, whether it's past relationships and jealousy or whatever that brings about.
I mean, everybody's got stuff. We all carry our own stuff, family stuff, developmental stuff. I mean, it's all part of the process. I don't know that it's more clinical, but it's just, I think we understand it maybe from a different perspective. And sometimes it becomes easier to deal with because you know it's not about the other person, that it's about all this other stuff. So maybe
Yeah.
that in that way.
Yeah, and I think there's we've been trying to be, especially with 3 kids, conscious of not overanalyzing
Yes.
and being the stereotypical shrink parents, basically. So we sling at each other if we have to, and we don't mince words. And one of the things that we actually kind of from psychology stuff that I think we adopt is this idea of rupture and repair, which basically means stuff happens, talk it out, work it out, and that's the way it is, right?
Yeah. Humor is a big part of our household too. I think that helps. A lot of sarcasm and humor in a light, fun way. So.
I like that, and I'm going to use that with my wife. Actually, when I'm, have done something and she is not happy with me, I'll tell her it's about her past and not so much about me. Will that work?
Deflecting is not a bad option.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what the Fraser does for our guests on here who have not been to the Fraser. We've had a period of time where we've been challenged by closings, as you have, and we'll go through that in a bit. But we basically offer 3 things. We are the official starting point of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, and that means that we have this welcome center, which is essentially a concierge service for anyone who comes into the state of Kentucky and they want to know where to go. What does Rabbit Hole offer? What are the prices? Can you help us to book a tour at Rabbit Hole or any of the other distilleries? That is a free service, and we have hundreds of thousands of people that come to the museum and take advantage of that service. Well, in a normal year, this year we haven't had hundreds of thousands of people come, but we'll get back to that, I think, soon. The other thing that we have is this Bourbon Exhibit on the 2nd floor or 3rd floor, which is the Spirit of Kentucky Bourbon Exhibition. It's a hands-on, interactive, and it's really an exhibit about the category of bourbon. What is bourbon? Why does 95% of the bourbon in the world and 100% of the good bourbon in the world come from the state of Kentucky? It's about the water, it's about the limestone, it's about the land. And as I'm sure Kaveh will tell you, it's also about the people who are working here in the industry and how much they can help you out. And then the other thing that we do as the official starting point is we offer bourbon programming. And believe me, folks, I'm really looking forward to a point where we can get back to doing these live and having a couple hundred people in there doing these tastings live and kicking through bourbon like we always do. It's a lot of fun, and I am grateful to Kaveh and Heather to be the first ones this year. We decided to kick it off virtually, and we'll probably do a few more that way. Let's talk about the brand. Rabbit Hole is relatively new brand when you consider the history of some of these brands. But I mean, I marvel that I get to a liquor store and you're already right there on the shelf next to Jim Beam and Maker's Mark and Four Roses and some of these legendary brands. Did you think you would get there this fast?
Honestly, we're marveling every day ourselves. It's one of those things that Heather can speak to it, but it's every day I wake up, I got to pinch myself that actually it's happened.
Yeah, that's hard to believe. It feels like it's been a roller coaster, but it's amazing. It's unreal. It's completely surreal to me sometimes. I
think we've been very fortunate in a lot of ways, Andrew. And I think that part of it is having really amazing distributor partners and now a bigger partner, if you would, with Pernod Ricard that allows us to spread our wings and achieve the goal that that kind of dream that I had from the beginning, which was be one of the next great American whiskeys.
Well, you're well on your way, and I appreciate that. I think it's probably time for us to taste our first because our guests are probably anxious to get to tasting, and if they're like me, they're probably cheating already. But let's start with Kaveh. And we talked about that brand. This is a 4-grain, and the 4th grain though is a honey malted barley.
Yeah.
Temptation might be for some to throw wheat in as the 4th grain. Tell me about the decision there. And I know you did your homework. You went to work and learned this industry. before deciding what to distill?
Yeah, so this is a nod to my affection for Scotch, because when I started thinking about new recipes, I realized there's not a bourbon on the market that has barley as its secondary flavoring grain. As you know, most are either rye or wheat. So this was kind of an experiment to see if we could use barley as a secondary grain. And the other source of inspiration was essentially the beer industry. A lot of great craft brewers that are experimenting with a lot of different malted grains. That was another inspiration. So that was the beginning of it. And I wanted to make sure also it's an approachable, softer bourbon, and that's where the wheat as well as the malted honey malted barley really bring that kind of softening elements to this whiskey.
A lot of master distillers and owners have tips for tasting. I know our audience at the Fraser is pretty educated. They understand bourbon pretty well. But do you talk about the chew? Do you talk about the Kentucky hug? What do you advise people as we do our first tasting?
Well, the first thing I tell folks is, look, this is a 95 proof bourbon, so it's pretty high octane, if you would. So breathe through your mouth and smell through your nose, so that way you don't get that burn in your nose, and you're able to really pick up the notes that you want to pick up in a good bourbon. And what I'm getting is green apple, a lot of citrus, pear, those vanilla and caramels that you want in a nice bourbon, and there's a little bit of kind of honey and oak spice as well. That's kind of the first thing that I would do. And then, for me, the color is really a solid indicator in terms of the age of the bourbon and potentially, how much of the interaction that you want with the wood you're seeing in the liquid. And then after that, I start tasting it. And one of the things I tell folks is to think about both the front palate, mid palate, and the finish. And what I mean by it is that you're going to have certain flavors that you're going to pick up immediately, and then you're going to let it do that Kentucky chew, which is essentially literally like you're chewing it, absorb the taste and experience it, and then lastly let it go down and see what kind of flavors and notes are essentially staying with you after you've swallowed the drink. I want to taste it right now.
All right, let's get a little taste, and folks along with us, we saw the tasting notes there. I always marvel at tasting notes because I know they're 100% legitimate and there's science behind it, but the power of suggestion is awfully good as well. And sometimes I'm like, oh, you said green apple, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's definitely.
One of the things also that's really special about this bourbon is the fact that we age it in toasted and charred barrels, and that's another feature that's really unique to this whiskey, because most barrels are aged in just charred white oak, but we go through that extra 20-25 minutes of toasting, which really gets the heat in the wood and brings out essentially the flavors that you really want. It opens it up so the liquid over the course of the years picks up and interacts with the wood in a much deeper way.
Where did you learn that process from?
So my first mentor is a gentleman named Larry Ebersole. Larry was at the Seagram's plant back in the day. Now it's MGP, and he kind of came of age with Jim Rutledge and Dave Shurek and those guys. He was the master distiller at Pernod Ricard when Wild Turkey was part of their portfolio. And that was the beginning. And then I just started taking a lot of courses. And Kelvin Cooperage, Paul and Kevin McLaughlin have been dear friends for a very long time. And spending a lot of time with those guys, for me, it made sense that toasting would be an added value here when it comes to the quality of our whiskeys.
Okay, excellent. Well, first of all, I see there's a little bit of chatting going on. I want our guests to know that if they have questions, they can send their questions in the chat. The Precious will send me via text. This is our high technology this week, what those questions are, and we'll get those answered. I do my research, but I don't pretend to get to all the questions that people have, because we have very, very educated bourbon consumers here in Kentucky. So the toasting, is that essentially the same as you would get? I mean, bread is bread, and then you toast bread and you get, it caramelizes a little bit. You get a little more of that sweet.
Yeah, so here's the distinction. If you think about charring, charring is a quick incineration. Literally, you're talking about 30, 40 seconds, boom. And it gives this kind of a exterior char layer that one of the things that it does, it actually serves as a filtration system. So it kind of strips away some of those tastes that you don't want in a clear liquid, clear whiskey. Now, what toasting does, think about it as toasting marshmallows. So it's a longer process. At Calvin, we're talking about 20 to 25 minutes. And one of the things that we do is that I literally, and this is what the guys do at the cooperage, they literally put their hand on the barrel as it's being toasted over time. And it's really the temperature. So you want that heat to penetrate the wood and really get deep in there, and opens up those pores. It allows oxygen to interact with the liquid over the course of 4 or 5 years that the liquid is aging. And it is that marshmallow-like kind of essentially tastes that you get in some ways, I think, a lot faster. You get a lot more color and a lot more of those vanilla and caramel notes that you want in a good bourbon come in a lot faster through that toasting process.
Heather, Kaveh's obviously done his homework, and he when he came in, he came all in to Kentucky bourbon. You at the time are a young mother with 3 kids that you had in 5 years, and he's coming home with all this stuff. Did you ever, marvel at like he educated himself in a hurry? What was that like as you're trying to get kids burped into bed?
It was really unreal, because he's bringing these, I just think about the time, when we had everyone at the dining room table, and they were all, I don't think I realized, like these heavy hitters that he is somehow charmed enough to get to come to our house and talk about this stuff with them. I mean, you absorbed everything you could about it, whether it was reading books or meeting people or talking to people, or just, it was pretty surreal. the whole thing.
I was bringing all these guys around basically just to sit around and talk whiskey with me. And this is now looking back, 8, 9 years ago. And at that point, it still was the early days of bourbon. A lot of these guys like Jim Rutledge, just super sweet, very, very open and accommodating. There's another gentleman, Richard Wolf, who's a bourbon broker now. He was at Buffalo Trace. These guys are all sitting around a table where we're kicking back, drinking whiskey and talking about it. And Heather joined us, and
I felt lucky to be part of it, just to hear what they were saying. And
it was fun.
It was pretty amazing.
For the record, you were the first heavy hitter that he charmed. Easy for him to get to these guys. So one of our guests just asked if the toasting is done before the charring or after the charring.
Yeah, it's done before. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So Heather, I'm interested in that because you grew up with Kentucky bourbon, and you knew the Jim Rutledges of the world, and Fred Noe and Chris Morris and Bill Samuels and these guys. Did you have a favorite bourbon before Rabbit Hole? And if so, what was it?
Honestly, I really had no idea how sophisticated bourbon was. I started drinking whiskey in college. I was like the Kentucky girl in Illinois that was drinking whiskey. Honestly, it was either Woodford or Old Forester that I chose. However, you go into these bars in Illinois as a 20 something, and there's not a lot of options. It's like the Jack Daniels or the Maker's Mark, and that's about it. But those were my kind of go-to when I did. And honestly, I didn't know a lot about the history or necessarily the details. I guess I knew about the pomp and circumstance of it all, but not necessarily the details until he started digging in. And then I realized how kind of magical it all is.
I think it really was a dare, because she was daring me, essentially saying that this is a lot better than Scotch.
Yes.
And that was really the beginning of
Yeah,
it.
I'm like, you can't drink that. You're marrying a Kentucky girl. No, Scotch. And it was always like, I never liked Scotch.
And you know what was amazing, Andrew, is that looking back now, I started coming down to Kentucky in 2003, and we were living in Chicago at the time, and we'd go to some really great bars in Chicago or restaurants, and there was just not a whole lot of options on the back shelf in 2003, 2004. And then, Old Forester, really for me, when I first had Old Forester, it was really a discovery, but I'm like, this is a great, great bourbon. But you couldn't really find it in a whole lot of establishments, even in Chicago. So it was a surprise. Now, Woodford was a different story. And then slowly, all of a sudden, we saw, the proliferation of all these great brands.
So interesting how history changes that, that story, right? As well. Old Forester, for a period of time, oh, that's the old guy's bourbon, and now it's coming back as the hip bourbon.
Absolutely.
Recognize it as this great, amazing bourbon at the price point. Woodford, with the relationship with the Kentucky Derby, just skyrocketed.
Yeah, for sure.
At a certain point. So the next one we're going to taste is the Derringer, but not yet, because I'm going to tease this along a little bit. Let's talk. I don't know if people know this, Kaveh, but you're from Iran.
Yes.
And you grew up there until you were 14.
Mm-hmm.
How did that early life in Iran, mold and shape the man that you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I would have never thought that if you would have talked to me back in the day, I would have never thought that I'm going to end up in Kentucky marrying a Kentucky girl making whiskey. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. But interestingly enough, my grandfather was one of the first guys that imported tobacco into Iran, and he had his own cigarette brand. And he was an entrepreneur. I think, my relationship with him really was the foundation of the side of me that was more business oriented, if you would, and interested in doing something more personal. And I think, the other piece of it is the fact that I went to an American school all through my early elementary, middle school years before I moved to the States. And, I actually went to KFC. There was a KFC in Iran, believe it or not. It wasn't KFC then, it was Kentucky Fried Chicken. Used to watch football on Sundays. I remember playing baseball with the kids around the neighborhood. I mean, it was all kind of a lot of expats that at the time were living in Tehran. And, that experience for me was fundamental because aside from the cultural things that are phenomenal, I think there was just this sense of, in some ways, being at home. There was a feeling of kind of simpatico with the culture, with the way of being. So for me, my aunt, who's from Chicago, said that she said that I'm probably one of the only people she's met that when I stepped off the plane, and in my first hour I was an American because I just felt like I was home finally.
And all that upbringing was before the revolution.
Yes.
And
yes.
so the family never returned. So you also shared with me that your grandmother was the first ever female high school principal.
Yeah. We lived I grew up in a family that was, I think, educated and very progressive, particularly for the time. And yeah, my grandmother, who passed away just a few years ago here, actually, and she, by the way, she moved to the States probably about 5 years before I did. That's how progressive she was, because my uncle went to University of Illinois. He moved here in 1963, and then my grandmother moved here in 73. And they kind of laid the path, by the way, for us coming here. And yeah, she was an amazing lady. She was one of the first school principals out there, female school principals, and that's the kind of stuff that really, again, made it when the revolution was brewing, really impossible for us to live there because just collectively it felt like this is not the right place for us.
So then you meet a woman who has an incredible family in Kentucky, and I mean, family is obviously very important to you long before you got married and had your own kids.
Oh my God. I mean, first of all, let me just say I'm so thankful to Heather for joining us tonight. I think I'd mentioned to you earlier, Andrew, that Heather's grandfather, Sonny Bass, who's a pillar of this community, passed away 8 weeks ago. And then his wife of nearly 75 years, Gladys Lowenthal Das, passed away yesterday. And, I think this is really two things. One is the reflection how amazing Heather is to sit here with me, knowing I know how she's feeling right now. But I also think it's a testament to Sonny and Gladys, because they really embraced me wholeheartedly. Sonny was actually one of the first people that supported me in this endeavor with Rabbit Hole. It started obviously with, like most businesses, with family and friends, seed money, and he was essentially the first person that stood up and supported me. So I am forever indebted to the two of them. It's definitely a loss for us, and I really appreciate you being here.
Heather, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. When I talked to Kaveh before the program, he said that you were really his counsel when it came to the foundation of the company and the culture that's required to run a successful business. Where does that come from?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know what you were referring to, other than maybe just the fact that you mean the community that you set up.
Well, I think, part of it is, for me, it's just how you run our family, right? I mean, I think one of the things that I feel just completely, privileged and honored is that, first of all, your family embraced my family, and the fact that I was able to join the community in the way I did, and the way you are as a mother, as a matriarch. I think, all those things really, for me, are part and parcel of what I love about you, and part and parcel of, I think, what, in conversations about, this is the kind of place that we want to have. This is the kind of company that we want to have, that makes sure that it doesn't matter if it's 5 people, 50 people, or hopefully one day 500 people, that everybody feels part of the Rabbit Hole family.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and even when we were first starting out, and we were raising money and all of that, it was, it felt like a community, and making those connections, and then people feel, they're just extensions. So then, people that I knew growing up that, invested, or my family, or, it just felt like such a community thing, that it's nice that gets carried over into the actual Rabbit Hole community, that people feel accepted and understood. I think that psychology part of things, I think too, just being very mindful that, it's, everybody has things, and you have to be very thoughtful about the environment and how we treat one another. And
I think that's what he was referring to. It was the stuff at work. Everybody's got stuff, and when he's got employees that maybe have stuff, and you have to find a way through that. We're great at advising him on, whether it's, let's deal with it, and then let's forgive and let's move on.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's really important to me is just that whole community-based giving back to the community too. And so I think that was also something I really stressed. I think that I was on the board for the Center for Women and Families for quite a while, 7 years, I think. And I think those types of things, it's important to make sure that we're giving back to the community, that we're embracing, our community, but also, getting people involved in the community and giving back to.
I mean, that's one of the things, speaking of like Sonny and Gladys, I think, that's one of the things that I realized and picked up and loved about them immediately. It goes back to that love and work that we were talking about, Andrew, where in some ways it's fundamental to Rabbit Hole. It's all about, the idea of find what you love, go all in, but at the same time, be able to create an atmosphere. It gives opportunity to other people. And that's really just seeing your grandparents and you and all those things that, it's part and parcel of, your family here in Louisville.
Didn't happen by chance. I mean, this is by design. I mean, you decided to put this Amare at Opus on every single bottle of Rabbit Hole. Is that a reminder? Is that your guiding principle? Is that your vision statement? Why is it so important?
I think guiding principle is a great way of capturing it. It really is. I think it's just a mantra that it really allows us to stay focused and most importantly, stay focused on what's important to us. I think that as human beings, the best we can do, and this kind of comes from our psychology days, is to be able to sublimate, meaning that we divert our energies towards pro-social things, and I think that's what this statement really is about. If we can create an atmosphere where, for me, it's the love of bourbon and putting my back behind it, and at the same time creating an atmosphere with Rabbit Hole where we allow that same principle to take root with our team members. We have a lot of folks that moved here from Canada, California, Illinois, Minneapolis, just Florida. And this growing team really came in because of the passion that they sensed in Rabbit Hole. And that principle was fundamental to it, because when they came in, from the interview to the time that they joined us, they realized that this is for real, that we're trying to essentially create social mobility and professional mobility as well. So you can start in the warehouse and move up to be a distiller or beyond, particularly now with the partnership that we have with the second largest spirit company in the world, really allows to do that and create that opportunity and expand love and work for a lot more people.
Well, it's awesome. What a great mission. We got a question from one of our viewers on the program, and it was about, you mentioned getting counsel from Jim Rutledge and some of the other titans in the industry. Do you now feel an obligation, or did you before that feel an obligation to do the same to young people who are trying to break into the business?
It's funny you say that, because I was just talking about this with Heather this morning about how many folks reach out through LinkedIn and other channels, essentially, either trying to get some guidance or advice or some assistance of some sort. And I'm also part of the Endeavor Network. So as part of the Endeavor Network, a lot of that is how do we essentially pay forward, and either through the connections that come in just through LinkedIn organically, as well as through Endeavor. That's really one of the things that's top of mind for me, because I really do think that there's still lots and lots of opportunity in our industry. I truly think that we're just still in the early stages of bourbon and American whiskey. So there's room for more folks, as long as they really do something original and distinct.
Let's talk about the four foundations of the business: collaboration, transparency, authenticity, and meritocracy.
Yeah.
How did you come about them? Why are those important to the foundation of the business?
Well, I think this is where part of it is just my own family ethos. Part of it is, Heather's family ethos. Meritocracy is, part of it is, for me, as an immigrant in particular, it's just part and parcel of who I am. I don't expect anybody to give me a handout. I realize that I got to work for it. And then, as long as I work for it and I earn it, I hope I have the opportunity to grow and develop. And again, going back to the earlier point that we were talking about, that's one of the things that I think is absolutely beautiful about our country, and the opportunity that everybody has to be able to move up. I think in terms of the other pillars, particularly authenticity and transparency, when I first got in the business, I realized that there's a lot of smoke and mirror. There's a lot of things that are happening from a standpoint of production that people don't get to see. And we wanted to showcase that. You've seen the distillery, it's glass and steel structure. It's designed to be able to just be fully out in the open, no smoke and mirrors. You see what's happening, soup to nuts. And I think collaboration goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where there is no one person that creates these products. And that's part of the reason, first of all, I don't necessarily adopt the title of master distiller, because I think that's really something that, I don't know if I've earned it. And I don't think necessarily it's something that applies to me. But I also think that as a team, we don't have a master distiller. We all work together with a sensory group that's really capable, and that's and we should really celebrate that.
All right. I think our folks are getting anxious to taste something else. So, this is a program about love. This is a Valentine's Day program. So let's talk about the inspiration of Derringer, inspired by Heather, and let's taste a little while we're at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Derringer is, it's one of those things where I just think that it's a really, really special bourbon. It's a wheated bourbon, and it's aged somewhere between 4 to 5 years on average. And then it's aged in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. Now, Pedro Jimenez is an interesting cask because, there's a lot of different types of sherries, and PX is probably on the spectrum, has the highest sugar concentration. So it's a really sweet sherry. And, it's a great story because the wood for that sherry cask is from Ohio. The lumber goes to Spain, and then the cooperage over there picks it up, Cascanolia, and they put it together. They give it to a family that grows the sherry, harvests the sherry, and then basically have the sherry in the cask for 2 years. Then they send it to us in Kentucky, and then we take our wheated bourbon and age it in this PX sherry cask. It's a very sweet bourbon. The base is wheated bourbon. It's already got that kind of a sweeter tone to it. PX takes it to another level, and I just think that it's a sugar bomb. If you like really that kind of a sweet bourbon, this is the drink for you. And it's we can go through the notes if you want, but I think you can taste it for yourself and tell me what you think.
Yeah, let's throw up those tasting notes. The sherry, the traces of caramel that you mentioned, and all full disclosure, that is the On the Rocks bourbon that I am drinking before starting the tasting program. I had to make my choice, and it's an outstanding choice. And obviously, this is the one bourbon that is inspired by Heather. Is that because of taste profile, or is that because of the name that you went with?
I think it's the taste. She's very sweet. Cheers.
Cheers.
When you develop this, that is just really outstanding. It is sweet, but I've got a bit of a sweet tooth, and that's outstanding. Are you targeting a taste profile? Are you experimenting with recipes? How do you land here?
Yeah, I start with recipes. That's kind of, I think the example that I use, that I think about myself more like a chef than a distiller. I start with the ingredients, and that's kind of how we started anyway. That when I first started experimenting with the recipes, Heather was worried that I'm going to blow up the carriage house there. But it's like cooking chili. You kind of play around with different recipes. You kind of get a sense of directionally where the taste is going, and then you build on that. But the point of having these different expressions is that I think that where bourbon and American whiskey is going, as people are getting more and more sophisticated, like wine and like craft beer, they're going to start distinguishing between different flavor profiles and different types of grains that are used in these products. Not that different than the different types of grapes that you see with wine, right? People now, late 70s, early 80s, people are picking white wine, red wine, and rosé. Now, all of a sudden, you got Merlot, Cab, Zinfandel, across the board. I think that's where whiskey is going to. And I think that the goal, the aim is to have whiskey expressions that are really, truly different. Each one of them is different. And it's not just based on the blending, but by the ingredients that actually go into it. And that's really the inspiration behind it.
Well, kudos on this one. Outstanding.
My friend.
Heather, I'm curious your answer to this question. Who brought who down the rabbit hole?
Well, as the story goes, he brought us down the rabbit hole. However,
Thought it was
I
the
brought
other
him
way.
to Kentucky, so I don't know, but he, yeah.
I think I was
So-
scaring the bejesus out of her. Let's put it this way.
I think it was more about just like, what are you doing? It started as like, a little kind of interest, and then it just went like a big snowball down the hill kind of thing, which was so exhilarating and exciting sometimes. And other times you get that like panicked, wait, hold on, you're like, we're quitting the psychology, and we're like, get those like moments of, like as any entrepreneur, I guess, does in those moments. But
Well, I think put it in context. We had 3 kids, 7, 5, and 4 years old.
yeah.
I had my practice at that time for a little bit over 20 years, and I'm approaching 50. I was in my late 40s at the time. And she's like, so let me get this straight. What are you going to do?
Exactly.
You're going to close your practice. You're not going to have any revenue coming from that. We got 3 little kids,
Yeah.
and you're going to start a bourbon company.
Yeah.
You're going to take the family down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
That was kind of the way it went multiple times.
Yeah. And we had
It's an awesome story.
yes.
I have to tell you, like, I've been wrong all these years since I've been familiar with your brand. I thought it was Heather that brought you down the rabbit hole because of, Kentucky roots, Kentucky bourbon, and, you went down the rabbit hole. So when
I never could have imagined, though. There was no way. I thought we were just moving here to have a simpler, easier. I mean, we were living in Chicago, so there's a lot of, with 3 kids, which made us stand out a little bit. It's expensive and kind of
We were living
crazy,
in the
hard
city.
to get around, and schools are hard to navigate. And so I thought, okay, we thought together, this is an easier way to live with our kids,
Tell me
Threw a wrench
about
onto that.
So yeah, and then
because he's commuting still. Like you have your practices, you moved to Kentucky, decide instead of moving to the suburbs of Chicago and living that life, let's just move to Louisville, your home state. And you've got these kids, and he's trying to do 2 jobs at once, learn this.
yeah, it was like the bridge. While he was building his practice here, he was still practicing and teaching there to kind of bridge the gap. And we had a newborn-ish. She was 6 months when we moved here, so I was trying to juggle, and I still had to do my fellowship, and it was a lot. Right.
But this is where I think that what I tell folks is she's very humble. I think she's an extremely, extremely strong woman. And if she was not as strong as she is, kind of holding the fort, if you would, there's absolutely no way I could do what I'm doing. Absolutely no way. And I think that's what, is really kind of important, because for me, part of it was getting the courage to do it. It's one thing to want to do it, but you got to have the backing at home. If you don't have somebody behind you supporting you, or even rooting you on, it's starting a business as challenging as it is. If you don't have the support at home, forget about it. So I think, in that sense, that foundation, that pillar was just, invaluable.
That's awesome. The other thing I learned about you, Heather, because I asked Kaveh to tell me something that people might be surprised by, and you never know where this is going, but he said, you're a mechanical whiz. You fix everything. You fix the computers. You fix the appliances. You fix the lights. You fix everything.
I think in another life, I was an engineer of some sort. If I had had a whole different trajectory, that I would have gone to engineering school. I like to fix things. I'm not always that successful at it, but I do enjoy fixing things.
Honestly, dishwasher, washer and dryer.
Though I have to say, I do, YouTube is very good. Nowadays, you can
Amazing, isn't
look
it?
everything up, right? So I just follow what they're saying. Back in the day, though, you had to really do a lot more research. But even as a kid, I used to like to take things apart and put them back together. So I don't know how I ended up in psychology. I think that says a lot about my, the stuff, the baggage. We go back to the baggage, right? Why we all end up in the field that I'm
That's
in.
right.
So.
Well, I believe that you would be successful, both of you, in whatever field you so chose. I kind of subscribe to that theory. So you chose psychology and you're a successful psychologist. If it were engineering, you'd be crushing it there as well. Let's talk about the distillery. It's fresh, it's innovative, it's cool. Like you said, it's transparent. You can see through it. And it's also closed for like the last 10 months. That's a bit of a trip in the business plan.
Yeah. It's been really hard. I think obviously most on our hospitality team, we basically were humming along before COVID. Last year, we had almost 35,000 people go through our distillery, and it came to a screeching halt. We are excited to be able to reopen, hopefully sometime next month. We're going to start probably with a couple of days a week and slowly, build on that. And we are bringing our folks back online. We're able to hold on to as many as we could. I know it was not an easy process for them, but yeah, it's been challenging. I think what's been fortunate is that we've been able to continue to make our whiskeys, bourbon and rye, over the course of the last 10, 11 months. Initially, we got involved and did whatever we could in terms of contributing from a hand sanitizer standpoint and working with the federal government to take care of particularly with frontline folks, first responders.
So I think our folks understand this, but like the guest experience, that's a totally different business than distilling whiskey, right? So
yeah.
Explain to our audience what you were shooting for there. What did you want? I've been through, and it's an outstanding experience, by the way.
Thank you.
But what were you trying to accomplish in, Andy Trinan shows up and he's needing to learn about your brand and see what you do in an open and transparent way?
Yeah, I think part of what I wanted to do is to elevate bourbon and American whiskey. I think along those lines, we also wanted to educate and entertain people. So the idea was you come in, you see everything soup to nuts. So you really learn from step one to the last step what goes on into making bourbon. Because that goes back to those early days where I felt like, this is the most bizarre thing, because outside of Kentucky and Tennessee belt, most Americans didn't know about bourbon. Even in metro areas like Chicago or New York or even LA, again, this is going back 10, 15 years ago. So I thought that it's really important for us to educate our consumers and, more importantly, be able to excite them. This is where that fully immersive experience is. So actually the distillery, the atrium of the distillery where all the magic happens, was designed like our house in Chicago. We dug the basement and built a staircase that went from the basement all the way to third floor. And we did the same thing here at the distillery. So we built a spiral staircase essentially in the middle of the atrium. So you see from the cooker, fermenters, distill, beer well, all the way up to our tasting room. You literally get lifted off the floor and you're able to experience all the senses and everything in full view.
Awesome. Like I said, it's an outstanding experience. Couple of guest questions. This one, you don't see a whole lot of women leading in the bourbon industry, although the number is growing. The question is for you, Heather. What would you say to women who are interested
In the field?
in diving into the bourbon industry?
Oh, I don't. You would probably be able to speak better to that than me, other than just, I think, I don't know.
Go on, get in.
Just do it, I guess, that like life's too short to think too much about it. The same way that he did, you ask a lot of questions and you connect with people. It's been amazing how kind and sweet and open people are. And the bourbon women is a great, and whiskey chicks and all these like women focused organizations are wonderful, but also just the, even like I said before, the heavy hitters or whatever you call them are just so kind and sweet and open and willing to ask, answer any questions you have. So I think don't be afraid, I guess, to ask any question or to just dive in. As far as, women, men doesn't matter. I think they're so excited to have women in the field as well. I know that when we've gone to different panels, or when we went to Bourbon and Beyond or something, and the women would get up there, people get so excited and animated about, women being involved. And because historically that wasn't the case. So I guess in the sense, just don't be afraid to ask questions, and because people, and in my experience, everyone has been so lovely. It doesn't matter who they are.
Jump in. That's what I say. Just jump in.
Just do it, right?
I think women have a better palate anyway. I think that's one of the things that we really mindful
absolutely.
of. They do.
I've heard that women can taste 67 different things and men can taste 6 and 3 of them are bacon.
That's right. Yes.
I love that.
That's
that.
right.
Question about the Henry County location and when that might open.
So we have a warehouse campus there, and we're actually building our 3rd warehouse there. There was plans for a visitor center in Henry County, but unfortunately COVID really kind of put a hold on that. So right now we worked with Luckett and Farley, and we have a beautiful, beautiful visitor center designed. But part of that now is really, depends on what happens with hospitality in general. That's kind of where we are with it.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you. And yes, keep the questions coming. These are great questions. It's time for our next tasting. Let's taste some High Gold and get into a high rye bourbon.
Yeah, let's do it. So, this is a take on a traditional, basically Kentucky bourbon, right? High rye is most of the bourbons out of Kentucky are high rye. What I decided to do, I'm a big fan of malted grains. I think you're going to see more and more malted grains coming into the mix. There's more malting houses opening up around the country. So it's really, really exciting. So this is our kind of version of a high rye where you got 70% corn, but you got 30% malted grains. It's 25% malted rye and 5% malted barley. High concentration of malted rye. It creates a lot of those enzymatic reactions you want in fermentation, but also brings out a lot more, I think, interesting flavors, particularly those spices that you want in a rye whiskey. Same thing again. This is aged in a Kelvin cooperage, toasted and charred, 95 proof. One of the things that also I tell about folks about our whiskey is that we put the liquid off the still in the barrel at 110 proof, which is lower than the standard 125, which a lot of folks do. And what the 110 does, it brings a little bit more of that oxidation that you want early in the process. So more oxygen, it opens up the whiskey more and allows it to again, bring out a lot more interesting flavors over the course of maturation. And the yield is less on the back end, but the flavor is definitely worth it.
Yeah, it is outstanding. And I definitely get a little spicy finish.
Yeah.
Little pepper. I don't know if it's just me, like the older I get, the more I'm like starting to ease towards ryes. And we're gonna end with a big rye. So
ryes are phenomenal. I'm a big rye guy, and I like it. One of the things I like about High Gold, and we'll taste Boxer Grill in a minute, where if you can kind of round out those spices a little bit, it just it's like a perfectly well balanced dish.
I'm interested in, you had mentioned to me your father's side of the family, Kaveh, and your mother's side of the family, and you spent the first part of your life doing kind of what you were supposed to do. It was the doctor side of the family. but there was always that entrepreneurial spirit in there ticking, like what's that next big thing? Did you ever think it would be bourbon, and what else would it have been if it weren't?
No, honestly, I didn't initially think about it, bourbon, but I grew up in California and I saw what happened to Napa and Sonoma in those early years. When I finished high school and started college, I started talking to my dad about maybe getting a parcel in Napa or Sonoma, and he just basically laughed his head out because he's like, you have no idea. He was like, what are you doing? Thinking about making wine. But that was my first kind of foray into that, and from a dream standpoint. And then when I moved to Kentucky, or started coming down to Kentucky, it was like, this is really, it was a deja vu moment because I felt like it's reminded me of the early days of wine in California. And there's another person that I think about, Lois Matus, who was, she's a Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. Lois was one of the first people that talked to me. And I will never forget that. Such a wonderful, wonderful lady. And, we talked about the similarities between Napa and Kentucky. And that was really the beginning. I was thinking, this can happen, that I could be someone who contributes to developing bourbon in Kentucky the way wine did back in the day in Napa and Sonoma.
Awesome. Well, that leads perfectly into my next question, which was, who are your influences? Who are the people, I guess, obviously you're a really smart guy and you dive into history. You don't just consider the people who've taken the time to have dinner with you, but who are your influences in the business?
I can't forget about Larry. I have actually, let me just, we're sitting here in the bourbon bunker, and I hold this bottle always really close to me. It's a bottle that Larry gave me. It's hard to see it with the lighting, but it's called Ebersole's Excellent Rye. So Larry was a major influence because he is really, Jim Rutledge talks about Larry as being the master of master distillers. He's the guy that probably has been involved in so many different projects and not a whole lot of people know about. He's just truly wants to be in the, kind of behind the scenes guy, but a tremendous influence in me and my approach. Lois was another early kind of, I think, influence, particularly on the hospitality and the vision of building a place that allows, essentially the place to become center, because Lois was also involved with Woodford Reserve and the kind of vision behind Woodford Reserve. I think another person actually is Chet Zoller. Not a whole lot of people talk about Chet, but Chet, has written a couple of great books. I'm good friends with his son Trey now, but Chet was, I actually got introduced to him through, I think, Sonny, and he took the time to sit down with me at Equus years ago, and we had some bourbon and gave me his book, and that was another thing in terms of the history of it, which was really, really helpful and kind of guided me to where to look to learn about the history of Kentucky bourbon.
Yeah, Chet and Trey's historic whiskey knowledge and their historic whiskey collection is in the Refined exhibit at the Fraser History Museum, and it is amazing. Some of these old brands that you can learn from, and how much some of the stuff, and both, marketing genius. So that was really outstanding. Heather, tell me about that, because you probably had impressions from some of these guys when you were a young woman going off to college, going off to start your practice, and then 20 years later, there they are in your home. Did you ever have like an aha, weird, like crazy moment?
Honestly, I didn't know that much about, the bourbon industry. I went from high school to college, and then at that age, I just hadn't really thought much about bourbon. I wasn't even of age. And then I came back briefly, but I moved back to Chicago, so I wasn't really around it. So I realized the impact of it when he started talking about it, I guess. And
when I was getting geeked out about
when
it.
he was getting geeked out, and I'm like, at first you're like, yeah, whatever. And then all of a sudden I'm like, no, wait a second. These people are like the real deal. I think that was when it really hit me. And I felt just as geeked out as he did. And I wanted to be a part, and why I sat at the dining room table when they would come, or we would go somewhere and they would walk up to him and talk to him. And I'm like, wait, maybe.
Well, that's actually one of the most interesting things to me too, because, as I got to know them, I really couldn't believe how little, again, people know them outside of Kentucky.
Yeah,
like if you're
absolutely.
dug in and you're into bourbon, you're going to know Jim Rutledge,
Yeah.
right? But outside of that kind of group, not a whole lot of people knew. And it's just shocking to me that this is a guy who's making these amazing bourbons and not a whole lot of people are familiar with them.
Yeah. And even
Yeah.
me, I mean, I grew up here and I didn't know until, I mean, I moved away for a chunk of time when I actually could drink, and then I came back, but you don't really think about it. I enjoyed bourbon. I liked, I knew about the properties of it and how to taste it, but I didn't really know the people behind it, other than you just didn't really think about the history of it that much, other than the companies. I just hadn't until you started to do it. And then it's pretty cool.
Maybe I'm telling on myself because I'm a big dork and I thought it was the coolest thing ever when Jim Rutledge became a friend, or when Bill Samuels agreed to go to lunch with me. I'm like, oh my gosh, these are titans in the industry. It's amazing.
100%.
And you had some of that. What was your, like, how did you make that first pitch? It's clear you're reputable and a smart guy, but did you make a first phone call and say, hey, I just want to learn more about this?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was like cold calling. I was basically calling and just saying, hey,
Kaveh's very charming.
am I?
So, I mean, and you know how to talk to people, you know how to engage people, not necessarily in, you don't have to necessarily be talking about bourbon, but you know how to talk to people. You're very charming. And I think
Well, thank
that
you.
helps.
Nice.
And you're honest, you're real, I mean, yeah. So
Well,
I think
appreciate it.
I
That's
think
very sweet. Thank you.
people are okay with talking to you, because you wear your feelings on your sleeve, and you're
Yeah.
open and honest. You're not, you're not trying to pitch them something. You were really just saying, I'm excited to talk to you. And I think they all thought he was a little nuts at first. They're like, you're going to do what? I mean, that was my
No,
impression.
that's
You
true.
say
That's
they're
true.
like, okay, a little just like, sure, whatever you say. And then we're appeasing him. But then they realized pretty early on that he meant business.
Yeah.
And that he really had he had something, especially when they started to taste the product, even when we were tasting the clear.
Yeah, the fresh off the still.
Fresh
Yeah.
off the still stuff. They were like, this is not bad.
Yeah.
So I think it's.
But I think honestly, and I tell people when they ask, it's just reach out. There is, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. People are really open and accommodating. Look, Chris Morris is another person we haven't talked a whole lot about. Chris is phenomenal. I can't tell you how supportive he's been of the craft movement. This man single-handedly is really just, I know because now I see him, and I've seen him in action in the last several years as part of the KDA. He's a champion of craft distilling. I mean, in any other industry, you wouldn't see that. You don't see essentially somebody from another company saying, hey guys, why don't we try to prop up and help out other small kind of, would-be distillers? And he is one of those folks. So, I just tell people, reach out, because you got nothing to lose and people will help out.
And he loves history, and he loves Kentucky bourbon. And so I think that's awesome. And I do want to agree with Heather that you are an excellent recruiter.
Well, thank you.
You've done a good job with that. You're kind of living the American dream. And so, and you talked about early in life going through American schools, and it's a weird time politically, and I'm not going to get into politics at all, but can you talk a little bit about being an immigrant and experiencing and seeing the American dream and now experiencing it?
Yeah, I think, look, I talk about this frequently. I think that we are truly in, and this is not hyperbole on my part. I think that we're living in one of the greatest countries in the world. And I think that it's easy for um, folks to take it for granted sometimes because you don't necessarily always have a perspective that's different than what you're used to. And I think that's one of the things that, certainly speaking for myself, I can't speak for all immigrants, but speaking for myself, it's one of those things that I never forget because I have a reference of what it could be and what can be and what it is in a lot of places. And it goes back to, this basic foundational kind of principle that we have in terms of opportunity and the system that really fosters that and allows people based on their merit to be successful. You don't see that anywhere else. I mean, I think, I used to talk about this with dear friends about Europe. We have a European partner. I think there's a lot of great tradition and history, but the class structure is a lot different, and mobility is not the way it is in America. And till this day, I will still say that if you want upward mobility, U.S. is the country. That's it.
Awesome, thank you. I've got some people asking about the new Barrel Select program.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really, really super excited about that. I don't know how much, Andrew, you know about it, but I'm a big proponent of supporting creative guys. Have the privilege to join the board of trustees at Speed. And we have a lot of great artwork actually at the distillery to showcase these folks. But part of the single barrel program, what I'm excited about is that we have essentially only 10 barrels we're going to release this year. Fred Minnick is going to be the first pick. He's making the first pick this year. All the proceeds from that first barrel is going to go to the bar and restaurant folks here in Louisville, so we can support the folks that have struggled through COVID in the last 10, 11 months. One of the things that I'm really excited about this program is that not only the liquid is going to be unique because it's a single barrel and it's picked by various folks that are going to be part of this 10 barrel selection this year. The bottle is different and the artwork on the bottle is going to be different. I've commissioned there's illustrators that I reached out from all over the world, and we are really excited about this South Korean illustrator. Kasich is his name, who's basically the first person. The labels are ready to go now. And it's essentially 6 illustrations of Alice in Wonderland. So all the 6 different characters from Alice in Wonderland. And what I told Kasich is like, look, all I want you to do is to take these characters and bring them to the 21st century. See if we can kind of have a modern rendition of the classic characters of Lewis Carroll. So there's 6 bottles in every case. There's going to be 6 different labels in each case. And, all the 10 picks are going to have those labels. I'm really, really excited about it. And hopefully I think it's going to roll out sometime in April.
That is an awesome project. That's so cool. I've got to make sure I can get in line for one of those. Let's taste some Boxer Grail.
Let's do it.
Let's dive deep into a 95% rye.
Yeah, this is so this goes back to Larry. Larry, when he was at Seagram's and the current MGP, he's really the architect behind the 95.5 rye that we basically taste and experience with a lot of different brands. Of course, this is a Kentucky straight rye, so it's not Indiana. However, I did have long conversations with Larry about this. And one of the things that's interesting about this, there's 2 things to remember. One is that 110 proof, that basically the new make goes in the barrel at 110. The other thing is the barrels again. I tell folks to put this against other 95.5s that are just in charred barrels, and you will truly see the impact of those 2 features and how they can potentially distinguish one liquid from another, right? This is one of those rye whiskeys where with 95, you would imagine or you would expect a huge kind of spice coming forward, where in fact, I get a lot of citrus and floral notes on the nose. One of the things that I love about this rye is that I get some rose typically. And it's just, when you're drinking it, you got that citrus and floral aromatics in it. It's a lot sweeter than you would expect from a
It's sweet.
rye whiskey.
It's my favorite.
Totally. This is my first time ever tasting it, but I am blown away by that.
Yeah.
It has some real sweet citrus notes in there, floral notes.
And this is what I mean by that toasting. I think, this is where you get a lot of that vanilla, a lot more of that caramel that's in the wood that you want. It just comes out through that toasting process, because it just really opens it up. And if you ever get a chance, I'd love to take you to Kelvin. I was just there a couple of days ago to really see and get a perspective of what it does to a barrel.
Well, I'd be happy to go with you, and then maybe we'll play some tennis or play some golf afterwards.
I love it.
Sounds like a plan.
Weather.
Several people asking. Like I said, it's a very educated group that we have about Pernod buying the brand recently, and what this does for them, and what this does to help you, and what this does to help them.
Yeah. So we were fortunate enough that once the distillery went up, we got a lot of folks started courting us, just because the kind of footprint that we laid down in the foundation was there.
Because it's awesome. They courted you because it's awesome.
Yeah. And I think it is. Hey, let's face it, it is pretty awesome. But we ultimately decided to go with Pernod because of honestly, it was because of Alex Ricard. And this is actually a really cool story, because Alex, who you got to put it in perspective, that they let go of Wild Turkey a long time ago, and they've been wanting to kind of get back into Kentucky bourbon for a while. Alex was here and driving around, and he saw our distillery going up, and he called his guys and said, "What the heck is this?" That was kind of the beginning of it, and kind of we went from there. But one of the things that I loved about him and Pernod is that, very similar to Brown-Forman, even though it's a publicly traded company, it's a family-run business. So we had an opportunity to meet. I had an opportunity to go to Paris and go to south of France, get to see him, his family, the board. And one of the things that really was a clincher for me is two things. First of all, I was able to maintain my ownership. So this really became truly a partnership. We got our initial investors out with a nice return, and I was able to stay there with a couple of family members. So it's just really me, myself, Michael Motamedi, who's our CMO, and another family member, Cameron Leali. We just kept our shares, and that was kind of what was attractive about it, because I wanted to see this brand get to where I wanted to get to in my lifetime. That was really the driving reason for partnering with Pernod. And the fact that we have full autonomy, Andrew, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about this setup, because they don't want to, I think they understand what we've created is really special. They want us to really drive it. And with this partnership arrangement, what it does for us is that it gives us the distribution network that we need. I'm always reminded of a conversation that I had with Bill Samuels. He was another, early kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily a mentor per se, but certainly who gave me an advice or two. And, he basically says, one of the things that is relevant and we have to keep in mind with this business is that in order to scale, you need a good partner on sales and distribution. And that's what Pernod brings to the table. Pernod brings those sales and distribution connections and the network that we need, not only to be a domestically successful brand, but also internationally, which is, part of what our ambition is.
Yeah, that's great. And they want you to run Kentucky. You didn't have to ask them to be on this program with me tonight.
No, no, no. You know what? And the funny thing about it is, this is actually it's interesting because, as you can imagine, when a partnership like this is going down, if you're working for Rabbit Hole, you're like, what the heck is going to happen here? Am I working for Kaveh or am I working with somebody else? And those are some of the things that we really had to address. No, I think we have full autonomy, and certainly as partners, but even beyond that, that's what they're not trying to kill the golden goose, for lack of a better way of describing it.
We have several of our guests who are, this is a Valentine's program. This is a program about love, very clear. And some of our guests are interested in that topic. One of them asked about the perfect Valentine's gifts that you give each other. And the other was, what's your ideal Kentucky date night, restaurant, store, attraction, Fraser History Museum, whatever.
He is really hard to buy for. We try like
bourbon. You can buy me bourbon, actually. That's
no. We try to go for those more impactful things, the things that are special. So I don't even know. I mean, we've come up with, in the past, I've come up with things that have more significance than actually like something fancy. You're more into things that have meaning or
yeah, I mean, honestly, that's kind of where it is. I think we're very fortunate. It's not material things that is as important as much as it is things that are emotionally close to us. So I think that's kind of the stuff that we try to get for each other. It's not always easy, but that's part of the challenge.
Several times.
I
thought something was going to be amazing, and he's like, yeah, no.
But as far as date night, I mean, what's your favorite restaurant in town?
Oh my gosh. There's so many good ones. Well, now we haven't been in so long because but I mean, we have a lot.
Well, I mean, I love
Jack Fries.
I love Jack Fries. There's no question about that. But I also love Decca. Decca is, Annie just, yes, ceviche is great. But Annie just got, she's got I think was the best chef in the South from JBF. I think it's just amazing.
We have so many favorites.
Yeah.
We tend to try to rotate, but But
I think, for me, I'll speak for myself. I think, if we go to Jack Fries, we get a nice, I like to have a Manhattan, then a nice bottle of wine, and then maybe even finish it with a Derringer. That's kind of the way I would go.
I really miss going to restaurants. That experience and having people around and just, I miss that a lot. We used to. I know.
Hopefully,
it's a great town. There's so many great restaurants here, and we're all.
That was usually our date night, like dinner, and then maybe drinks somewhere else, and then
And honestly, the other thing is that we have some dear friends, and after 17 years, there's only so much time that we care to spend with each other after a date night. Sometimes we like to meet up with our friends afterwards.
Absolutely. Always, right? Almost always.
Yeah.
They're the conversation sometimes lags when
That's right.
Again, and I've been married since 2000. I love my wife. I want to thank some people got some small batch bourbon truffles in their packages. So if you'd like to taste those Art Eatable small batch truffles, delivered those, and they're Rabbit Hole specific. So thank you so much to Kelly and Forrest for contributing those. They help any tasting experience. Let's talk about your previous field and your current field. How much, for either of you, does psychology ever inform branding? I mean, to me, there's a similarity between psychology and branding or marketing. Do you call on those things ever?
Honestly, I don't think I could do what I'm doing without psychology. And this is where, yes, it was a detour to get to what I love to do, but without that detour, I couldn't do what I'm doing. I think on so many levels, certainly branding and marketing is part of it, because be it the Amare Opus kind of statements or other kind of ways of framing things, it's just absolutely key. But I think even more importantly, it's team building. One of the things that I think was my advantage is being able to build relationships, understand people. So from the fundraising aspect or part of Rabbit Hole to actually bringing people in, cultivating a culture, being able to build a team, that's all psychology, because it's all about relationships. And to that point, I tell my own kids as they're approaching college years is that, look, you can't go wrong with some of these disciplines that are fundamental, psychology, sociology. These are the ones that could be really useful, even though, you probably have to pivot when it comes to job. You're not going to necessarily go to sociology and psychology with an undergraduate degree.
But wonderful disciplines that can help you make informed decisions. I mean, I struggle with that. My daughter is a freshman at Center College studying psychology, but it's like, what are the jobs going to be in 10 years? Like, we don't know. So we've got to teach our kids critical thinking and problem solving and these kind of things that,
But I'll tell you, Andrew, we know who we look for. People that have solid, you got a psychology degree, sociology, or even English majors. I love English majors. A lot of these guys that are in just kind of basic fundamental humanities, particularly for marketing and branding, they're bringing that knowledge to the table that is really used. I mean, that's what branding and marketing is. It's about storytelling. It's all about storytelling.
All right. Well, we're wrapping up. A couple more questions from guests. One of them is about, each other. Could you be where you are, Kaveh? Could you be where you are, Heather, without the other? And not obviously you'd be sitting next to someone different, but in life, and where you are in your happiness, and where you are in your progression, and where you are in your profession.
I don't think my life would be as exciting as if I hadn't been with anyone else. I mean, just watching him has been amazing to me. I mean, and sometimes I feel like I'm the passenger just trying to keep the family together and do all these ancillary things. But at the same time, other times I feel like I'm more of an active part, but it's just been amazing to watch him. I would have never been brave enough to do anything close to what he did. And that to me is what's so powerful.
But at the same time, I don't think I could have done what I'm doing without you. There's just no way. Because no, I'm being serious. I'm not saying it just, but I think, there is no question that I would not be here without you for so many different reasons. But most importantly, because, there's a yin and yang here. I think this is one of the things that we talk about relationships, where sometimes, yes, you're kind of attracted to someone who's identical like you from a temperament and personality, but it doesn't work. You got to be able to kind of complement each other. And I feel that we complement each other. And I think we're able to, especially behind the scenes, uncensored, tell each other really what we think and kind of, just balance each other out.
Those are not always the conversations you have on your public programs and your Zoom meetings.
That's right.
I want to give you a chance to close it out. We got a great question from everybody on board, and we've got, hundreds of people watching on Facebook Live, a bunch of people on the program tonight who are on board, and they believe in an hour and a half that this Rabbit Hole project and product is outstanding. They also are aware that they're going to have about an elevator ride to tell a friend why they need to buy in and buy Rabbit Hole. So if I have to tell my friend why Rabbit Hole is something they should buy when they head to the shelf, what is the answer?
It's one of a kind. And let me explain that. I think one of a kind in the sense that, the big bet for me was I did not go out to buy sourced liquid. I think there's a lot of great brands out there that have sourced liquid, and there's nothing wrong with that. But my major risk, the piece that I think was probably the one that weighed heavy on both of us, was the fact that I laid down these personal recipes without knowing how they're going to come out. So what I say to people is that Rabbit Hole is one of a kind. If you truly are a discerning consumer who wants a one-of-a-kind whiskey where you can't get it anywhere else, Rabbit Hole is for you. Because if the warehouse, God forbid, goes up in smoke tomorrow, I got to start from scratch. I can't go out and buy it somewhere else or even blend it together. These are truly one-of-a-kind expressions.
That's really cool, and I appreciate that. I appreciate both of you so much for coming on. It just was a better night than I would have had sitting alone tonight. hanging out and eating food. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. We appreciate all the people who came on the program. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. That's a wrap.
Andrew, thanks for having us. And Kelvin, and golf or tennis?
Absolutely. Book it.
Right. Take care.
Thanks all. Have a great night. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Thanks. Happy
Bye-bye.
Valentine's.
Happy